I stood beside my husband's casket in my black dress, my 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, clutching my hand when my mother-in-law's voice cut through the organ music like a knife. Murderer. The word hung in the air of St. Catherine's Church. 200 heads turned, my daughter started crying, and Margaret Sullivan, my husband's mother, stepped into the aisle, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You killed my son." "You killed Michael, and now you have the audacity to stand there pretending to grieve." I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only hold Sarah closer while Margaret's accusation echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "She worked him to death." Margaret's voice rose, addressing the congregation now. "My son was only 34 years old, 34, and he died of a heart attack because she pushed him, demanded he make more money, refused to let him rest." "She killed him as surely as if she'd put a gun to his head." My father started to stand, to defend me, but I shook my head. What could I say? Michael was dead. He died of a massive heart attack while I was at work, collapsing in our kitchen while watching Sarah. The paramedics said he was probably dead before he hit the floor, and it was true that he'd been working long hours. True that he'd been stressed. True that I'd encouraged him to take the promotion that came with more responsibility and longer days. "Margaret, this isn't appropriate," my mother tried, but Margaret cut her off. "Appropriate? What's not appropriate is that my son is dead at 34 because his wife cared more about money than his health. He told me he was exhausted. He told me he wanted to cut back, but she wouldn't let him." She kept pushing, kept demanding more, kept making him work himself to death. "That's not true," I finally managed, my voice barely audible. You never what? Never told him to take the promotion, never complained about money, never made him feel like he had to kill himself to provide for you." Sarah was sobbing now, confused and terrified. My sister Rachel came to take her out of the sanctuary, shooting Margaret a furious look as she passed. "Mrs. Sullivan," the funeral director said quietly, "perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere." "No. Everyone here needs to know the truth. Everyone needs to know that my son didn't have to die, that if he'd married someone who actually loved him instead of someone who saw him as a paycheck, he'd still be alive." I felt tears streaming down my face, but I couldn't seem to stop them. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to tell my side. But another part, the part that had been drowning in guilt since Michael died, wondered if she was right. If I had pushed too hard. If my fears about money after growing up poor had made me pressure Michael to work more than he should have. "I loved him," I whispered. "I loved him so much." "You loved his income. You loved the lifestyle he provided. You didn't love him enough to let him rest, to let him take care of his health, to put his life ahead of your greed." The church was completely silent except for Margaret's accusations and my quiet crying. I saw people in the congregation looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and uncertainty, saw some nodding slightly at Margaret's words, saw the doubt in their faces. Then Father Thomas, The priest who was supposed to conduct the service, who'd been standing silently at the altar, walked down to where Margaret stood in the aisle. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said gently, "I understand your grief. Losing a child is the worst pain imaginable, but I need to ask you to sit down now. Please, not until everyone knows what she did." "Everyone needs to know the truth," Father Thomas agreed, "but the truth isn't what you think it is. Please, Margaret, sit down. Let me speak." Something in his voice made Margaret pause. Father Thomas had known Michael since childhood, had baptized him, confirmed him, married us. If anyone knew the truth of who Michael was, it was him. Margaret sat down slowly, her anger giving way to confusion. Father Thomas turned to face the congregation. "I wasn't going to speak about this," he began. "Michael asked me not to. He was a private man who didn't want people to worry. But given what's just been said, I think he'd forgive me for breaking that confidence." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, worn, folded many times. "Michael came to see me 4 months ago. He asked me to write down what he told me, to keep it in case. Well, in case exactly this happened, in case he died and people didn't understand why." My heart was pounding. 4 months ago. Michael had known something was wrong 4 months ago. Father Thomas unfolded the paper and began to read. "Father Thomas, I'm writing this down because if something happens to me, I need people to understand the truth. Especially my mother, who I love, but who doesn't always see things clearly. And especially Julia, my wife, who I love more than my own life. I have a genetic heart condition. It's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. My father had it. That's what killed him at 42, though the doctors didn't know it at the time. They just called it a sudden heart attack. I was diagnosed 3 years ago before Sarah was born. The doctors told me then that my prognosis wasn't good, that I had significant thickening of the heart muscle, that I was at high risk for sudden cardiac death, that I might have 10 years or I might have 10 minutes. I didn't tell Julia. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell anyone except Father Thomas, who I asked to hear my confession and help me figure out how to live with this knowledge. Why didn't I tell them? Because I didn't want to be treated like I was dying. I didn't want Julia to look at me with fear every time I left the house. I didn't want my mother hovering, restricting my life, making every day about my heart condition instead of about living. I wanted to live normally for whatever time I had left. I wanted to be a husband, a father, a person, not a patient. When I was offered the promotion at work, Julia asked me if I was sure I wanted to take it. She knew it would mean longer hours, more stress. She told me she'd rather have less money and more time with me, that my health was more important than my salary. I took it anyway, not because Julia pushed me, she didn't, but because I wanted to provide for my family while I still could. I wanted to make sure that when I died, Julia and Sarah would be financially secure, that they'd have the house paid off, have savings, have everything they needed. Julia fought me on this. She begged me to cut back my hours, to take care of myself, to prioritize my health. She didn't know I was dying. I'd hidden that from her, but she could see I was exhausted. She kept asking me to slow down. I refused. I told her I was fine. I told her we needed the money for Sarah's future. I lied to her and let her think she was the one pushing me to work harder, when really it was my own desperate attempt to leave something behind for the people I loved. If I die, when I die, my mother is going to blame Julia. I know she will. She's always thought Julia wasn't good enough for me, that she married me for money, even though Julia's the most selfless person I've ever known. So I need to say this clearly. Julia didn't kill me. My genetics killed me. The disease that killed my father is killing me, and I chose to spend my final months or years working hard to secure my family's future rather than spending them as an invalid waiting to die. Julia gave me the most beautiful 3 years of marriage. She gave me Sarah, the daughter I never thought I'd live to see born. She loved me unconditionally, supported my choices even when she disagreed with them, and made every single day worth living. If she could have saved me, she would have. She tried to save me every day by begging me to rest, to take care of myself, to put my health first. I'm the one who refused to listen. Father Thomas, if I'm gone and you're reading this, please tell my mother the truth. Tell her Julia is blameless. Tell her to love my wife and daughter instead of blaming them for a death that was always inevitable. And tell Julia, tell her I'm sorry. Sorry for lying about my condition. Sorry for not telling her the truth. Sorry for leaving her too soon. But not sorry for the time we had together, not sorry for Sarah, not sorry for loving her with everything I had for whatever time I was given. I love you, Julia. Take care of our daughter. And please, please forgive me for not being honest with you. I just wanted to live like I wasn't dying for as long as I could. Michael Sullivan. Father Thomas folded the paper carefully. The church was utterly silent. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Michael gave me this letter 4 months ago, Father Thomas continued. He also gave me his medical records, which I've shown to the coroner. The autopsy confirmed what Michael already knew. He had severe hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. His heart was a time bomb. The doctors are actually surprised he lived as long as he did. They said he could have died at any moment, sleeping, walking, sitting still. The work stress didn't cause his death. It was entirely coincidental. Ice. He looked directly at Margaret. Your son didn't die because Julia pushed him too hard. He died because he had the same genetic condition that killed your husband, the same condition that will probably be found in other family members if they get tested. Michael knew he was dying, and he chose to spend his remaining time providing for his family instead of dwelling on his death sentence. That was his choice, not Julia's. Margaret looked like she'd been struck. He was sick? My Michael was sick and he didn't tell me? He didn't tell anyone except me. He didn't want to be treated like he was dying. He wanted to live fully for whatever time he had left. But why? Why wouldn't he tell his mother? Father Thomas's voice was gentle. He wrote about that too. He said, "My mother already lost my father to this disease. I couldn't bear to make her watch me die from it too." Better she think I died suddenly than that she spend months or years watching me deteriorate. Margaret started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs. My own mother went to sit with her, holding her despite years of tension between them. Father Thomas came to where I stood, still frozen beside Michael's casket. He loved you very much, Julia. He wanted you to know that. He also wanted you to forgive him for not telling you the truth. He thought I'd treat him differently, I said through tears. He was right. If I'd known, I would have wrapped him in bubble wrap, would have tried to protect him from everything, would have made him into a patient instead of my husband. That's why he didn't tell you. He chose quality of life over quantity. He chose to live normally rather than carefully, and he wanted you to know that every choice he made, including taking that promotion, was his choice, not something you forced on him. The funeral proceeded after that, but everything was different. People understood now. Margaret understood, though her grief was now compounded by guilt over what she'd said to me. After the service, she approached me in the receiving line, her face ravaged by tears. "Julia, I'm so sorry. What I said, you were grieving. You needed someone to blame. I blamed you for something you didn't do. I accused you of killing my son when you were the person who loved him most. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. Margaret, we both lost Michael. We're both devastated, and we both have to live with the fact that he kept this secret from us because he loved us too much to make us watch him die slowly. That's going to be hard enough without us being enemies." She hugged me then, both of us crying for Michael and for the future he'd been stolen from and for the lies he'd told out of love. A week after the funeral, Father Thomas brought me the rest of Michael's letter, the parts he hadn't read aloud. Private parts meant just for me. Michael had written about our wedding day, about watching Sarah be born, about quiet mornings, drinking coffee together. He'd written about choosing to work hard not because I demanded it, but because he wanted to give us security when he was gone. He'd written about every moment of joy we'd shared and how none of it was marred by knowing his time was limited. "I don't regret the choices I made," he'd written. "I regret that I lied to you about why I was making them." But Julia, those extra hours I worked, they meant Sarah's college fund is fully funded. They meant the house is paid off. They meant you and Sarah will be comfortable without me. That was worth more to me than a few extra months of life spent as an invalid. He'd also written instructions about raising Sarah, about dating again someday, about not wasting years of my life mourning him when he wanted me to be happy. "You're 32 years old," he'd written. "You have your whole life ahead of you. Please live it. Fall in love again if you can. Give Sarah a father figure who can be there for her in ways I can't. Don't let my death define your life. Let our love define it instead." Margaret and I grew closer in the months after Michael's death, bonded by our shared grief and our shared guilt over things we couldn't have controlled. She helped with Sarah. I helped her get genetic testing for the rest of the family. Michael's brother tested positive for the same condition and was able to start treatment before his heart deteriorated. Michael's death might have saved my other son's life, Margaret told me 6 months later. If we'd known about this genetic condition, if we'd tested everyone after my husband died. But we didn't know, and now we do, because Michael made sure the truth came out even after he was gone. At my husband's funeral, his mother said I'd killed him, that I'd worked him to death through greed and ambition, that I'd cared more about money than his life. Then the priest told everyone the truth. Michael had a genetic heart condition he'd hidden from all of us. He'd known he was dying and had chosen to spend his final months securing our financial future rather than being treated like a dying man. He'd worked hard, not because I'd pushed him, but because he'd wanted to leave his family protected when the inevitable happened. Margaret learned that her son had died from the same genetic disease that killed her husband, a disease that could have killed him at any moment, regardless of work stress or life choices. She learned that her accusations were wrong, that I'd actually been trying to get Michael to work less, to take care of himself, to prioritize his health over his salary. And I learned that my husband had loved me enough to lie to me, to hide his condition so I wouldn't spend our final years together treating him like he was fragile, to work himself hard so that when he died, when, not if, his family would be secure. I've since remarried, as Michael wanted me to. Sarah calls her stepfather Dad and loves him deeply, though we make sure she knows about Michael, about the father who loved her so much he wanted to provide for her, even after he was gone. Margaret is Sarah's grandmother in every way that matters, and she adores Sarah's stepfather for making me and Sarah happy, something Michael had specifically hoped for in his letters. Michael wanted you to live fully, Margaret told me the day I got remarried. He wanted Sarah to have a father. He wanted you to be happy. By moving forward, you're honoring him, not forgetting him. At my husband's funeral, his mother said I'd killed him. Then the priest revealed the truth that changed everything. Michael had been dying all along, had hidden it to protect us, and had spent his final months living fully rather than carefully. The truth hurt, but it also healed. It freed us from false guilt and allowed us to grieve honestly for a man who'd loved us enough to lie, to protect, to provide even when he knew his time was short. Michael Sullivan died at 34, not because I worked him too hard. Not because of stress or ambition or greed, but because he had a genetic heart condition that was always going to kill him, and he chose to spend his final years living instead of dying. I miss him every day, but I live the life he wanted me to live. Fully, joyfully, without wasting years on guilt or regret. That's the truth Father Thomas told everyone at the funeral, and it's the truth that saved us all from destroying each other with misplaced blame. Michael's death was a tragedy. But it wasn't anyone's fault, and knowing that made all the difference.